Chapter 1 0 Day +1 Queens, New York. Fiona tapped in the familiar numbers and pushed open the heavy apartment door. There was that unwelcome, stale smell of cigarettes and old takeout boxes, and something else, a dismal note that made her sigh. The smell of failure. Her own workstation was impeccably neat, as was her custom, but the other three showed signs of a mighty struggle, a huge and lengthy focusing of mental power and abilities, and then the slow but inevitable descent into junk food, booze, and drugs. It was not a pretty sight, nor would it be tolerable for very long. If the others didn't make an appearance before 9, she'd be obliged by her own sense of tidiness to blitz their stations and accept the jokes about being the help to this trio of wayward minds. As Fiona fired up her own machine, she heard a plaintive meow. Bubbles was curled up, high on a shoddy bookshelf under the corner window, tactically positioned to enjoy either sunshine or shade, depending on his whim. He had a commanding view of their lair, essentially a converted living room and kitchen. Only the big, battered brown leather couch remained, and the kitchen has been reduced to a microwave, a toaster oven, and a corkboard covered with takeout menus. Beyond the kitchen, down a small hallway, were 2 small bedrooms, retasked as a library, a storage space for spare parts, and a small server farm. Fiona was not the only one to insist that these vital areas remained spotless. Here, they had agreed that none of the menagerie of toys, magazines, intoxicants, and perishables that infested each of the boys' desks would ever encroach. It was her habit to check the 2 rooms first thing in the morning, mainly to ensure that the equipment was still running and its prodigious heat output had not started a fire. Satisfied, she returned to her desk. "Good morning, Franz." "Good morning, Fiona," came the software's reply through Fiona's high-quality speakers. "How are you?" She sighed. "Let's not get into that. It's been a shitty few hours." Bubbles emerged and approached for the sole purpose of having his head scratched. "Do I have any email?" Franz probed her inbox. 5 messages. 1 is high priority, from Grigori. "Read it, please." There was a pause. "It consists only of 2 words, Fiona, repeated 100 times. "Don't tell me. Let me guess. Does one start with F?" "It does," Franz replied. Her smile was slight, but real. Grigori had dedicated as much as any of them, probably more, to the project that had crashed in ignominy only 6 hours earlier, and its outcome had hit him hard. Normally taciturn and imperturbable, even under stress, Grigori had a single vice, Manic Friday, a prolonged whiskey and cocaine bender, the proportions of which mirrored his overall mental state. Though its usual start time was 5 p.m. on the dot, Grigori had agreed to delay his indulgence until the project either was successful or went south. As the chips fell and they realized what had happened, Grigori had let himself go with genuine zeal. Before passing out on his California king-size bed, Grigori had obsessively and aggressively typed "shit fuck" into his email as many times as he had felt necessary. Fiona knew that he would be absent from their lab for the day, perhaps for the rest of the weekend. "What else, Franz?" Franz was an impressive and increasingly nuanced personal assistant, capable of learning from his mistakes and taking guidance from his creators. He enabled the group to automate a lot of tasks and reduce their considerable workload. Besides, Fiona had always thought, who didn't grow up wanting to be able to speak a command into thin air and have an intelligent computer reply? Just for kicks, in those early days of beta testing the software, Devlin had insisted on having a bit of fun. After 100 patches, Franz still tersely refused any request to open the pod bay doors. "You have an email from your father, an automated payment reminder from Chase Manhattan Bank, a coupon from CVS, and a friend-based message from Clark Pearson." Coffee machine running and a glass of cold filtered water in her hand, Fiona replied while swallowing her morning vitamins and ADD meds. Print the coupon, archive the bank thing, and tell me if clerk's message is safe for work. There was something profoundly unromantic about having a love letter, or what passed for one this side of the millennium, read out loud by a machine, however well-meaning he might be. I don't think so, Franz replied. It also contains the F word, he added helpfully. I'll read it later. Give me the one from Dad. In the strained prose of someone for years unwilling to even consider using email, George McAllister was still trying to reconnect with his only daughter. In what she would later concede was a fit of teenage angst, Fiona had gone through the whole process of university applications without her parents knowing. She had accepted a place in a respected computer science program in Manhattan, largely to escape their dysfunction, their judgments, their insistence that computers were just toys for boys, and that she might consider the exciting world of retail. She forgave them both, and there was no enmity there, not really, but she had become ashamed, in the last year or so, of having disappeared suddenly with little more than an announcement at a family dinner the very day before her flight. Reply, Franz. Ready for dictation, the program assured her. Dear Dad, thanks for the email. She hated to sound so formal, but then, so did he. His original harangue had included the complaint that she had failed to brief the family on her imminent departure. Well, what can he expect, Fiona reasoned much later, from a man who had spent 30 years in the British Army? We're all just products of what came before. I'm doing well. I'm working hard. I don't know yet about coming home this Christmas. Let me check on fleets. Last year's excuse that she'd left it too late and that tickets were in the multiple thousands of dollars had been weak, but at least had a veneer of the genuine. This year, she'd break her mother's heart if she didn't relent and make the journey to Edinburgh. 4 months out, Franz informed her there were still reasonable seats available. She would book tomorrow, or the next day. Fiona concluded the email without letting her emotions arise and without committing to anything. It felt like the ideal message for somewhat estranged parents. Send, Franz. Now, search the news. She pulled Bubbles onto her lap so that he could be part of the audience. This could only be a consolation for her, but would feel pretty good nonetheless. Here's your chance to cheer me up, please, for Christ's sake. Tell me that there's multiple mentions of an attempted hack against Marble Street and Bank. Franz was programmed to leave a decent interval between requests and outputs, lest his speed of computation overwhelm the more approachable and human characteristics he was beginning to display. The last news article about MSB was 3 days ago. Fuck. A glint of humor, perhaps recognizing Fiona's foul mood, but more likely one programmed by Devlin. Is that an instruction, Fiona? Check again, she growled, though she knew it was redundant. After a longer pause, intended to reassure his designer that the search had been truly comprehensive, Franz replied, I'm afraid there's no news, and nothing on the bank's public servers. Bubbles found himself shoved unceremoniously to the floor and began a petulant patrol around Fiona's desk. Email the team, she commanded tersely. Gaze, I'm in early, and there's nothing on the wires about you-know-what happening to you-know-who. She thought momentarily for the appropriate sign-off. Fuck all those motherfuckers. Love. Fee. She rose to pour more coffee. Send, Franz. Then start a new open office document. Franz started the software. Document created. Fiona was a professional, and she would behave as such. When things went wrong, it was only right to find out why, to put safeguards in place, and to learn from mistakes. It only seemed right to begin this process while also ridding the lab of last night's shameful detritus. She balanced her coffee mug on the desk where she'd been able to reach it easily, grabbed a large black trash bag, and attacked the fiasco her colleagues' desks had become. Put this one on the team server, Franz. They should all see and contribute to this, so it's as useful as possible. Title for file and document, Fiona added, angrily shoving a soggy pizza box into the lined bin. Lessons learned/relearned. The next to arrive, and indeed the only other member to show up before lunch, was Devlin. He seemed not to care that he looked and smelled horrendous. "Sup, Fee? Got coffee?" The crumpled, unshaven 24-year-old slumped into the sofa. "And painkillers?" It would have been easy, although entirely and alarmingly out of character, for Fiona simply to have told her youngest colleague to help himself and continue with her work. But there was a warm, motherly side to her, an instinct to insulate these three rather irresponsible rogues from the vagaries of their own weaknesses. French roast and Excedrin gradually eased Devlin's aches and pains, although not his abiding fury at last night's utter failure. "You know what went wrong, Fee?" he editorialized from the couch. "No, because nobody does," she replied without looking away from her screen. Her typing was just soft enough not to grate Devlin's sensitive nerves. "I do," he claimed. "It was Route 1, too direct, he searched for the word. "Too violent, not enough Ocean's 11, too much Godzilla." He hated to be ignored, and much as Fiona knew that short shrift might usefully prick the balloon of Devlin's considerable ego, she felt it churlish to do so on this particular morning. "Let's see how our group analysis comes out, Devlin. We'll do it like we always do, and something will come up." He was finishing the coffee and beginning to enjoy the lift it brought. "You know something else?" he asked with one eyebrow arching skyward. "The way there's nothing in the news about it?" Fiona asked, still typing at her customary speed. "They're ashamed that we got as far as we did. I bet you right now," he said with a glance at his slender, expensive wristwatch. "They're having an in-depth security review. Probably firing our guy Stillman, root and branch overhaul stuff." Fiona stopped typing only long enough to take another long pull of coffee. "Devlin, we know that avenue is gone now, but we'll think of something else. Remember the Courtois hack?" "Do I ever?" he grinned proudly. The champagne had rightly flowed after their team had cracked into a supposedly impregnable private bank in Zurich and exposed corruption and graft that had made headlines. In Central Europe, but still. "Let's wait for the others," she said. Let me see. You're proposing a technical analysis session," he postulated, "with Grigory Bondarenko, the morning after a manic Friday." He shook his head at the mere notion. "And one that started 9 hours later than planned. Feeling ambitious, are we?" It was this snide, critical part of Devlin's character which Fiona had truly begun to dislike. Right there was the answer, in a couple of sentences, as to why, despite being attractive in multiple ways, he had so far failed to get past first base with her, and why he almost certainly never would. He just wasn't nice. A genius, perhaps even a certified goddamn savant, and definitely growing up quickly across the board, but you'd never call him nice. After the rotten breakup with Michael, Fiona had resolved never to date anyone who plainly failed to match that description. "He even sent me a text. He's on his way." The young hacker on the sofa went quiet. This was the other reason he'd never succeeded with Fiona, her sensitivity to the peculiarly delicate feelings of poor old Avon. He was another man whose personal foibles had discouraged Fiona's interests in an otherwise smart and, in his own way, very attractive man. There had been Avon's year of secretive, unrequited adoration. Nothing weird or creepy, just an old-fashioned case of a guy fancying the pants of a girl, but lacking the conviction to say a word about it to anyone. Then Fiona overheard Avon's drunken admission at a party, the turning down of a spectacularly pretty medical student because Avon's heart was silently promised to another. And suddenly Fiona had a whole new problem, and more guilt than she'd expected. Certainly more than Devlin thought she deserved to be carrying around. "Great, it'll be good to get his input," Devlin said, apparently sincere, rising slowly from the couch and heading to his workstation. "Hey, did you clean up after me again?" he asked, his tone almost annoyed. Fiona stuck her head around her desk. "You're welcome, dickhead." "I mean, I can do it. I was gonna do it, he complained. Before the bacteria on your desk formed a collective and started campaigning for voting rights? Or after? He shrugged at her, but then smiled in gratitude. I don't deserve you. Too damned right. Devlin's inbox was a far busier place than Fiona's, both because he had the habit of signing up for any message board that might be useful, and because he has an alphabet soup of medical conditions, ensuring that he seldom, if ever, got around to tidying it up. He had also received Grigori's repetitive midnight missive, and amused himself by imagining the bearded Russian, who he thought of as an old man despite his belonging to essentially the same generation, listening to pounding metal while drinking Jack Daniels straight from the bottle, snorting lines of marching powder, and trying to forget that he'd just wasted 10 weeks on an embarrassingly toothless hack. It made him smile right up until he reminded himself that he'd just spent the same 10 weeks with the same gut-wrenching result. But there were other emails, more substantive and certainly more useful. Links to pages of code from fellow hacktivists, encrypted onion links to forum discussions held deep in the dark web, offers of help and offers of work. One piqued his interest, largely because he'd done it before. Hey, Fee, what's that? Feel like breaking into Homeland Security again? Might cheer you up. The wheels on her office chair zipped across the worn, grey carpet tiles, and she arrived in the room's central space in a whirl of unbound raven-black hair. Depends. Does the D end in a way? This would make 9 attempts on the DHS mainframe, with only 2 of the hacks having failed to achieve their objectives. For an organization so well-funded, Devlin constantly carped their security was a crying shame. Half an hour later, Devlin had located the telltale signs of poor programming, something he invariably termed slop. Jesus, they've hired 5-year-olds again, he muttered, motioning to his screen. For hacks like this, they both worked at Devlin's console, pooling their efforts on the most powerful machine in the room. Buffer overrun? Seriously? Devlin nodded, his expression professorial. If we've told them once. More than likely the vulnerability would be spotted and patched that day, but for the moment it presented a gilt-edged opportunity to enter the system and make some quick money. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, recently threatened with deportation, had been informed that no more entreaties by their petitioner, a U.S. citizen, would be heard. Simply put, the powers that be were gearing up to expel an elderly couple whose only crime was the desire to live in the same country as their hard-working, successful daughter. Devlin would happily have done this hack pro bono, but the pleasure of pocketing an extra $3,000 would help offset some of the gloom of last night's shit show. The trick, as always, was to ensure a veneer of legitimacy extended over everything they did. Documents featured the correct electronic signatures and had the appearance of having passed along the requisite pathways, so that even the most conscientious auditor would be stymied. Devlin and Fiona had lit on not 1, not 2, but 3 different methods of divining the login keys for various high-level DHS staff, including those wielding life or death immigration decision-making power. Fiona's own ceaselessly extended student visa, a godsend in a system as inflexible as this, was as much the results of Devlin's hard work as her own official entreaties. Over their 3 years together, the pair had secured residency or citizenship for around 20 people. Some were children, others seniors, but occasionally they took pity on an average Jose just because it felt right. It was good karma, Devlin once explained, and also perhaps because $3,000 was pretty good money for a few minutes ardent hacking. They'll still have to do the residency interview, Fiona cautioned him. We can't skip that step. She wished they could, but there had to be, within the immigration system, at least the memory of these 2 people having gone through the appropriate steps. The appearance of truly spurious documents was the fastest way for Devlin to unmask himself, not as a master manipulator, but as a sloppy one. One must always, Fiona reminded him, respect the bounds of the rational. I've scheduled it, and they'll get the notification shortly. Everything else should be fast-tracked. Good work, she said, and she meant it. The extraordinary freedom granted by the powers to decide her own immigration status left open such possibilities as staying permanently in the U.S. rather than being sent home to face the stony silences around her parents' dinner table. Anything but that. There's always Canada. Within moments, Devlin received confirmation of the first step in an anonymous Bitcoin payment. It would be washed through a sequence of accounts he had specified, and only through many hours of laborious work that he was certain no one was going to undertake would the hack ever be traced back to him. Even if it were detected, that it would not be. He would make sure of that. "I don't know about you, but I feel slightly better," he said, stretching long, simian arms and then patting his stomach. "Lunch?" It was only 11:30, but Fiona could think of nothing better to do. They were gathering jackets and keys when the apartment door swung open. "Hey, losers." Avon Barnes looked only slightly better than Devlin had upon his arrival. Red-eyed and sallow, he slid off a black leather jacket and sat gingerly at his station, wincing slightly. "Tough night?" Devlin asked with a grin. Not really," Avon began. "There was a moment there when I wondered if we were going to have the feds banging on our door, and I made a pretty unsuccessful attempt at preventing Grigori's latest self-immolation, but overall, it was just fine." He flashed a sarcastic face at them, and then shoved his keyboard aside so that he could lay his head on folded forearms. "Coffee?" Fiona offered. "Got anything stronger? You know, the hair of the dog?" Avon asked, his voice muffled. "Cat we can do," Devlin assured him. "Dog, I'm not sure." He spun around in his chair and then headed for the kitchen. "Let me check the takeout menus." Fiona slapped the crown of his head and then delivered to Avon a mug of coffee and the remnants of a small, lingering bottle of Jameson's, just one of the indicators that last night hadn't gone as planned. "You're an angel." "No problem," she said, always wary of compliments from this secretive romantic. The list of behavioral changes Avon would have to go through in order to win Fiona's affections had not shortened, even by one, since they met. He was closer to being categorized as nice than Devlin ever would be, but in other important areas, Avon Barnes fell woefully short. "Grigori surfaced yet?" Avon asked. Devlin took this one. "Nope. Reckon it'll be tomorrow afternoon before the Red October comes to periscope depth. Did you see his email?" They all managed a resigned smile. "Articulate, as ever," Avon said. "But we do need to get down to it," he said, turning serious. "Post-mortem." None of them liked the expression, but it served. After all, their mission had been fatally flawed. "Bastards," Devlin growled. "It's easier to blame the bad guys than to work to get it right for next time," Fiona told him. "So, pizza anyone?" "It was a good worm," Avon said next, deferring the thought. "Really, one to be proud of." Caffeine was flowing helpfully through his system. Pizza might be next if his queasy stomach could handle it. The only thing missing was a cigarette. "Nobody changed the rules overnight, right?" he asked, bringing out a crumpled packet of lights. Fiona tried not to judge, recognizing a hopeless addict when she saw one, but the fumes added nothing to this already fetid environment. "No changing the rules, Avon. No changing our shitty air conditioning either." "I'll blow it straight out of the window," was what he always assured them upon lighting up. As he did so, and the first deep lungful of smoke hit him, he visibly relaxed, and his face betrayed just how deeply satisfying an act this had become. The exhalation, long and luxuriant, was delayed as if ending a long period of reverse asphyxia. It was as though he was finally allowed to breathe out, having needed to for so long. At times like these, he felt no need to apologize to the others. He simply pitied them. "You don't feel," Devlin asked, wheeling his chair closer to Avon's station, "like a walking anachronism?" Avon shrugged. Why did Devlin have to disturb this perfect peace so often and so crudely? "I mean, a 21st century smoker. You guys are becoming an endangered species. Why don't you just quit?" On any other morning, Avon might have spent a few minutes explaining, yet again, The chemical action of nicotine in the brain, and the ways in which tobacco companies were knowingly manipulating the experience to make it more addictive. But today there would be no conciliatory response to Devlin's sociopathic bungling. "Why don't you leave off bugging me?" Avon answered, his voice low. It was barely a question. "Because I work here," Devlin snapped back. "You're gonna do this now?" Avon asked in genuine surprise. "Today?" "Why not?" he carped. "You have to quit sometime, and there's no time like the present." Suddenly, Devlin was being wheeled back to his station, feet dragged across the carpet, a strong Scottish hand steering the vehicle by adhering like a claw to the top of his head. "Shut it, do you hear? Let the man smoke in peace. We tolerate your vices, and you'll do the same." There was something about being told off in a Scots accent that really hit home. Okay, I'm sorry." Smiling at Avon now, all mildness once more, Fiona asked. "So," she repeated, "there was talk of lunch. Join us." Franco's Trattoria was busier on this Saturday lunchtime than during the week, but their regular table was still available. Priding itself on the ferocious heat of its authentic Milanese pizza oven, Franco's was dependable, inexpensive, and could normally have a large pepperoni and olive on their table in about 9 minutes flat. Avon sometimes angled for a table nearer the door. They received little sunlight during the working day as it was, and would have loved to have sat outside where smoking was tolerated, but the team had its traditions and he knew not to rock the boat. Devlin would only have started a fight, and he'd had enough out of the precocious little shit already this morning. It wasn't just the inability to indulge his chain-smoking habit that was obviously irking Avon. "You know, guys, I think we really need to take a hard look at this one." Ready to move on from their recent misfortune, Devlin couldn't agree. "So, we fucked up. Everyone fucks up sometimes, even the best." Among whose number Devlin quite clearly saw himself. "The bank brought the patch in earlier than we anticipated, right? Overnight," Fiona speculated. "How could they patch it," Devlin argued, "if they didn't even know they were vulnerable?" Their main source of intelligence on Marble Streatham was the flow of email traffic between its security officers. They were testing new code, a somewhat overdue patch to the bank's security system, and left a vulnerability known as a buffer overrun. The software had made a request that filled more than the allotted amount of RAM, actually a very serious error and, historically, the most likely source of security problems. However, there was nothing on the company's email server that related to fixing the problem. As far as Devlin, Avon, Fiona, and their ostensible leader, Grigori, knew, the bank remained clueless and vulnerable. So, they struck as quickly as they could, deploying a worm into the system that would gather and return specific data. Only, it hadn't happened that way. "Aren't we forgetting something?" Avon said. "It could have been a simple phone call, guys. Not everything goes on email." He thought for a second. "Or even a text." Fiona wasn't certain. "A patch with no paper trail whatsoever. No administrator worth their salt would." "Who says he's worth his salt?" Devlin contended. "What if he's a sloppy gimp, like so many others? What if this was 11 p.m. on a Friday and he just didn't feel like writing 3 stanzas about a totally routine software patch? I mean, the email would have ended up longer than the code for the patch itself." Their pizza arrived, and the presence of the waiter reminded them to be more cautious with their conversation. "So," Fiona smiled with a sudden false brightness, "what did you do after work yesterday, Avon?" The black engineer took a slice of pepperoni, looked at it, and then sheepishly set it back, still slightly nauseous. "I went home, drank the rest of that pint of Seagram's, and watched back-to-back episodes of Star Trek until dawn." In truth, it had been a drunken, morose pornography binge, but he wasn't about to admit that over lunchtime pizza with the girl of his dreams. "What about you?" "Oh, I ate a ton of Haagen-Dazs," Fiona shrugged. "Watched CSI and pretended the world outside didn't exist." In truth, she had popped a couple of pills and called up Clark Pearson for a sordid, moonlit fling in a quiet city park, but she wasn't about to admit that to a man who had genuine feelings for her. "Which leaves Devlin. What did you do last night, O arbiter of the singularity?" Avon snorted derisively. But Devlin seemed ready to stand by this outlandish statement. "I describe myself as an arbiter, not the arbiter, if you recall," he said. "As soon as the bullshit went down, I texted my guy, got a bag of the extra crispy, and continued my discovery of the fine British television program, Magic Roundabout," he announced proudly, as though informing the group that he'd been reading Plato in the original Greek. "You know the one, Avon?" "I do," he said, suppressing another giggle. "But don't think I could ever be high enough to really comprehend their work." Devlin shrugged. "Like I said, extra crispy. We all deal with failure in our own way," Fiona observed, signaling for the check. "Setback," Devlin insisted. "This was a setback. There was no failure. Our worm was successful, inasmuch as its operating environment permitted. I don't call that a failure." The three were standing, tossing cash and coins into a saucer. "Did we achieve any of our objectives?" Avon asked. "No, but—" "Then it was a failure," Fiona agreed, "but a useful one. We'll bounce back," she told them with optimism that was almost all genuine, "as soon as we get Grigori to return from under his rock." Back Bay, Boston, Massachusetts. Staring out of the window of his brownstone, Ralph Cole could think of not even a single reason why he shouldn't be working. His apartment was spotlessly tidy, dishes washed, trash taken out, shopping list assiduously made, and his email inbox was not only cold, but actually empty. There was nothing else on his list of things to do so carefully inscribed after his morning shower as it always was. No, he would have to face facts. This article needed his attention and nothing else would see it to completion, even if he hated every word of it, and it bored him nearly to death. He could tell himself that cod liver oil was in fact a potential medical marvel, with broad applications and no side effects, certainly something the health-obsessed public would be eager to read about. Or he could be reminded that the deadline for this relatively modest 800-word piece was a mere 4 hours away. But neither of these salient facts sparked a genuine desire to add to the impoverished collection of words of which the article presently consisted, which numbered an ungratifying 203. One of the blessings of freelancer life was that one could work to one's own rhythm, within certain constraints. It also meant that one could write, as Ralph often did, sitting in his underwear and taking long breaks to stare out of the window at Boston's ceaselessly cold, soggy weather. Flexibility and freedom, though, meant nothing if one was not inspired to write. He'd tried a reward system based on candy, but instantly broke his own rules, eating the whole bag of Skittles in a childish binge. He'd installed an application which, if one did not write quickly enough, spitefully deleted the previous sentence in an effort to drive productivity through fear of literary annihilation. Ralph uninstalled it after 25 minutes, writing in his review that it represented unforgivable gulag tactics for the blocked writer. But he'd encountered some success against the very greatest procrastination engine ever invented, the Internet. Those 203 words would simply not exist, Ralph knew, were the Internet available. He would be helplessly plunging down rabbit holes on Wikipedia, or researching any of the plethora of topics which truly interested him, perhaps even writing the article on the singularity, which was destined to become, Ralph felt a sense of inevitability on this one, his greatest piece yet, and one which might put him on the blogging map, big time. No, he was off-net. It was even on his list of things to do, which meant that all of his browsers were disabled by a horrifically passworded nuclear option, which he himself had elected would last the entire working day until just before his 4 p.m. deadline. Most of Ralph's working days featured at least some use of this application. It was, quite simply, the only way he would get anything done. He went back to his notes, reaching for a glass of ice water. It helped with his cigarette cravings, which peaked when he was writing. 16 days and counting, and if he were honest, the worst of the symptoms had passed. But that priceless change of scenery, that 5 minutes of decidedly non-writing, that tranquil tobacco episode with its guaranteed satisfaction, called to him like a dusky siren on the riverbank. He'd done it for Kim, really. So, fish oil. The next paragraph, about joint pain, arthritis and aging, came out pretty quickly, he was pleased to find. But then he lacked enough background on the antidepressive properties of these much-vaunted capsules, and for the 10th time today, resented the off-net protocol into which he had obliged himself. In the end, there was enough there to half-ass it, but he felt sure his editor would ask for more. The final paragraph was standard fare about the paucity of research and the lack of FDA approval, yada yada, and bingo, with more than 3 hours to spare, his draft was ready. The trouble was, his creative energies felt spent. Or was it just his attention span? He needed a break before tackling anything more substantive like the Singularity article. This would have been such a perfect nicotine moment. Son of a bitch. Instead, he called Kim. "How's my favorite artist?" She giggled cutely. "Just as poor and starving as all the others. Am I coming home to an actual dinner, or did you force Cal to give you another deadline extension?" Ralph bristled. "Another? That was one time, Kim." This was merely her way of forcing him to face his responsibilities. Shame was almost as powerful a motivator as a severed internet connection. "What are you in the mood for?" "You," she smiled. "All in good time, but—" "Spicy noodles?" she requested. "Absolutely." His Chinese cuisine was becoming out-of-the-park fantastic. Besides, a bowl of steaming noodle soup was perfect for these cold, dreary days. "I'll go grab some veggies. Don't be late, okay? Even painters in the throes of inspiration have to eat." Cooking, like deadlines or lists of things to do, provided structure. There was a sequence of events which now defined itself. Shop for ingredients, prepare and chop, cook, serve, eat. Ralph found himself feeling a little like Emmett, the unlikely hero of the Lego movie, always awaiting a set of instructions before beginning a task. What was so difficult about free-forming, just going with the flow, and letting his imagination run the show? It was cold, near freezing, as Ralph stepped out of the brownstone, an hour before sunset. He liked this neighborhood, with its restrained and reassuringly solid architecture. Its historical depth never felt intimidating or overtly expensive. But, as usual, the dreary weather cramped its potential, and the street sagged apologetically under the weight of a leaden sky. 2 blocks of brisk walking along sodden sidewalks took Ralph past a dry cleaner's and the corner store, an upmarket furniture place, and a couple of restaurants catering to locals. Their Asian grocer was a recent and priceless addition, given Kim's passion for home-cooked meals. If it wasn't spicy Sichuan or Thai curry, it was dishes from her native Korea. They'd just run out of yarsai, he knew, the jars of pickled vegetables which gave the soup a welcome, vinegary tang. Browsing the aisles, he found a jar of bright yellow bamboo shoots. Still unfamiliar and curious, but decided on the mixed pickled vegetables instead. On a whim, Ralph decided to add a fresh red chili and some extra ginger to the broth, and to pick up a cucumber to slice as a garnish. Kim's recent delight with his attempts at a more professional presentation had convinced him it was worth the extra effort. Her smile lit up his day. It was corny, but true. As he was leaving the Asian grocer, his phone vibrated tersely. An email from Cal Bergstrom, his editor. He read while navigating the sidewalk, which was threatening to become icy as the temperature dropped further. "Thanks for the fish oil piece. It's a bit thin on the mental health side. Let me have another 100 words on clinical depression. Next up, I want another life hack piece on good humidifiers for the cost-conscious. Best to Kim, Cal." He arrived back at the brownstone minutes after the nuclear option expired and coaxed his browser back into life. 10 minutes of research told him all he felt anyone might need to know about fish oil and depression, and he quickly plugged this into the article and attached it to a reply. "Cal, updated fish oil piece attached. I really feel as though it's time for the Singularity article. Could we push humidifiers for a couple of weeks while I get it finished? It's important. Thanks, Ralph." At this rate, Ralph thought dejectedly as he unloaded the shopping. He'd need a good dose of fish oil himself. What the hell was wrong with Cal Bergstrom? If it wasn't some dull-as-paint bullshit about health or that annoyingly new-age wellness mumbo-jumbo, Ralph was being obliged to write short, readily digestible pieces on how to avoid road rage, or take the stress out of flying, or how to survive Thanksgiving with the relatives. That one had been purgatory, although he'd coined the word merger drunkle, which had trended on Twitter throughout the holiday. But he wasn't ready to write another book. Perhaps, he often reflected, the healthy sales of his first effort, a popular discussion of the link between video games and violence, were leaving him resting comfortably on his laurels. Kim was home moments later, and took delight as usual in pressing her frozen nose into his neck as though plugging into her favorite heat source. "Thanks, lover," he chuckled. "I do appreciate these selfless acts, you know. I had far too much warmth in my system, and you were good enough to relieve me of most of it." Kim said nothing until her face had defrosted. Then, "You're providing an essential service. You know how many painters freeze to death every year?" They chopped vegetables and boiled noodles together while Kim patiently allowed her boyfriend to de-stress about Cal Bergstrom. "It's not that I don't think fish oil is important," Ralph half-lied. "But doesn't he see there are important things in the world beyond short-term health fixes and," he almost spat out the despicable term, "life hacks?" "I say this every time," she said without exaggeration. "But it's a job, Ralphie. How many freelance writers out there are licking envelopes or doing horrible SEO work for a sweatshop?" He was slicing garlic, and Kim worried that his distracted, animated rants might one day cost him a fingertip. "I get it. I enjoy it on some strange level. I mean, it's bringing important data to the public. I just think we need to be reclaiming an audience which cares about something deeper, something with more substance than the clickbait pulp that Yahoo News churns out." For Ralph, such news was a near-worthless infotainment, a distraction from weightier matters which required the world's attention. But, Kim often reminded him, for Cal Bergstrom, this stuff was dependable dollars and cents. "Nobody's gonna pay ya to bore the crap out of their audience," was one of Cal's initial reactions to the idea of a major article on the singularity. Kim took his arm, as much to get his attention as to ensure that his fingers didn't wind up part of the ingredients. "He wants happy clicks content, Ralph, and that's what you have to give him for now. I'm doing my best, but painting and teaching art aren't going to bring in much bacon," she pointed out. There was welcome distraction in going through the steps of creating a truly fantastic broth. "This is why," she said, lifting a spoon of the soup to his mouth, "we don't use packaged bouillon. It just isn't the same, right?" Those hours of boiling chicken carcasses, which never failed to make the apartment smell like an alley in Chinatown, were finally bearing good things. The broth had a meaty, flavorsome depth which could not be created in any other way. Spices added complexity: garlic, ginger, red chilies, and those wonderfully numbing little Sichuan peppercorns. And after a little more tweaking, Kim was satisfied. "Noodle time." "I know that you know it's important," Ralph told her as he ladled steamy noodles into their soup bowls. "The singularity, I mean." This wasn't exactly true. Kim did her best to keep up, but technology moved quickly. Ralph's research interests migrated in parallel, and she found herself feeling almost technophobic, despite using most of the latest gadgets. "Perhaps what Bergstrom needs is something which would appeal to a boob like me," she said, as they walked through to the living room, their bowls brimming with hot soup. "A simpler take on things, less philosophy and more about how this is going to impact me and my life." Ralph was stirring hot sauce into his broth just for that extra kick. "Okay, so you know the term comes from Courtois, right?" "I've heard the name." She thought for a second. "Futurist." "Good enough. He feels that there will come a time," Ralph explained while Kim began slurping noodles, "when humanity and technology will kind of fuse together, like a marriage of the two." She stopped slurping. "And this isn't like the Borg in Star Trek, right? I mean, even slightly?" Ralph was shaking his head. "Not like that. He believes we're going to harness all the good things about technology to make our lives easier. Like," he reached for an example, "like installing a component in your brain which links to the internet and lets you do Google searches, just by thinking about it. Kim was familiar with the concept, but it still perturbed her. Inside my head? Yeah, implanted surgically. A machine? She asked skeptically. We're not sure yet, but yes, a mechanical device. It would give you direct access to the entire world's information without having to type in any search terms or sift through any data. She laid down her chopsticks. Wait, isn't this the same guy who wants someone to cut off his head and put it in the fridge after he dies? Ralph nearly spat a mouthful of soup across the apartment. Freezer, he laughed, and at a temperature damn near absolute zero. You know why, right? Because he lives forever or something? She asked, lifting the bowl to her mouth. This soup is fantastic. Ralph nodded, but kept on going. There's the theory that medical technology, he said, well, technology in general, will develop at a non-linear rate. What's that now? Kim asked, focusing more on her dinner than on the future of mankind, but still basically with it. It's not going to be a matter of 2 + 2 = 4, he explained. It'll be exponential, so that 2 × 2 = 4, then times 4 = 16, and then, get this, Kimmy, times 16 = 256 times... A raised finger stopped him. Kim swallowed her noodles before speaking. Gotcha. So, if we were able to extend human lifespans by 30 years in the last 10,000, Ralph enthused, what will we be able to do in the next 10,000 years, Kim? Consider that. She did, chewing thoughtfully. We'd have people who might never die. Yup. Or people whose ailments wouldn't kill them but could be made to wait until technology catches up and provides a cure, hanging out in deep freeze. Yeah, Kim admitted. But that's not life, is it? I guess not. It's suspended animation. Ralph felt it best with a novice like Kim to personalize the question as much as possible. But imagine this. We both get cancer or something way down the line, and we don't want to die, obviously. Obviously, she parroted. So we get frozen and wake up in 2100 or something, a time when curing cancer is as simple as being given a flu shot. She reflected on this. But we won't know anyone. Huh? Ralph looked up from his noodles. All our friends will have died. We won't recognize the world we arrive into. But we'll be alive, Ralph exclaimed. A second chance. Kim frowned. Who's to say that we deserve it? Now she'd stopped making sense. Deserve it? Kim, what on earth do you... It'll be yet another of these treatments which comes first to the so-called developed world and then only very slowly to everyone else. The rich will be happily frozen and will all still be dying of cancer, even when they find a cure, she emphasized with chopsticks aloft. The rich will get it first. You know that's how it will be, Ralphie. Don't tell me you really think we're going to live in some fantasy, Star Trek universe where everyone's equally healthy and happy. He shrugged, answering sheepishly but honestly. Yeah, I kind of think we will, at least on my most optimistic days. I hope we will. She rose to refill her bowl. I thought I was supposed to be the idealistic artist, she teased, and you the hard-headed seeker after truth? Ralph remained on the sofa, feeling heavy with noodles and just a little nuked from the extra spice he'd chosen to include. She was right, as ever. It was pure arrogance to expect a future generation, their planet already clogged with uncountable millions, to warmly embrace the unfrozen and expensively ease them back into normality. Why should we expect such a gift from our successors, Ralph asked himself, when their chief inheritances from us would be a crowded, fractious, drowning world? I guess I'd just like a second chance, Ralph explained. Another ride on the roller coaster. Kim sat closer to him now, her bowl set atop their glass coffee table. We all would, but if we only have one, doesn't that make it much more precious? He found himself nodding. Every time these issues came up with Kim, he'd learned something. Sometimes he even took notes, integrating Kimisms into his outline for the article. By this point, it was easier to see the work becoming a full-scale book, if ever he could persuade himself to sit down and write the damn thing, than anything he could conceivably take to Bergstrom. But, for the love of all that was holy, affordable humidifiers? They finished eating and shared the post-dinner chores as they always did. Happy to be asked, Kim described her day of working on a large canvas which she hoped to enter for a competition and the planning of a small mural for the local kindergarten. Relaxing in front of the TV, Kim initially thought herself too full of noodles and soup for any funny business, but she relented as Ralph's hands found their way past her defenses. Besides, he was always much more fun than anything which might be on TV. Queens, New York. To the stunned amazement of everyone, they returned from lunch to find Grigori sitting at his workstation drinking a soda and regarding them with a quiet seriousness very different from the enraged tone of his midnight email. "Indy!" Devlin exclaimed, rushing to embrace the stoical Russian. "My friend, I'm so pleased you're not dead." Grigori withstood the hug, stony-faced and impassive. "Yeah." Devlin couldn't believe his impression had fallen flat. "Come on, guys. Salar, from Indiana Jones?" Blank stares were his response. "Anybody?" "Sit down, kid." Grigori was the leader of their team. They could quibble about qualifiers, ostensible or unofficial or even occasional, depending on the scope and implications of Manic Friday. But he was the oldest, the most experienced, and certainly the one capable of the greatest maturity and poise during a crisis, one of which, unarguably, they now found themselves in. "How you feeling, boss?" Avon asked. "Okay," Grigori replied with a little shrug. Fiona couldn't believe it either. "I got to say, we're a little surprised to see you today." "Well," he said, closing his laptop and wheeling himself a few feet towards the center of the room, their usual forum for open discussion. "I figured we've got a lot to talk about." Devlin nodded. "The hack." "The failed hack," Fiona stressed, reiterating her lunchtime theme. "You know," Grigori said, retrieving the can of soda from his desk, "my grandfather used to say that there were no failures, only learning opportunities." "Sounds wise," Devlin nodded. Grigori took a long drink as though it might quench his rage as well as his thirst. "He'd been married for less than a year when he was arrested by Beria. You know who that was?" They nodded tentatively. "And then got himself strung up by a length of cheese wire." The room silenced abruptly. "Where's the learning opportunity in that?" "Jesus, Grigori," Fiona began. "Nobody died last night. It was just a bad hack, that's all." The empty soda can hit a wastebasket on the far side of the room. 3 points, Devlin tried. "Silence, boy." Devlin glowered at his boss, but the older man ignored it. The kid's emotions swung like a goddamn metronome, and Grigori was not in the mood for any of Devlin's vaguely autistic yammering. "Bad hacks fail to achieve their objectives. We were guilty of that." "Agreed," Avon said. "But we put ourselves in danger too. We revealed our source." "We don't know that for sure," Fiona said quickly. "I don't even think Stillman knew he was being surveilled." "But we have to assume he does now," Grigori countered. "Our route into the bank has been destroyed, and we're left holding a useless worm and no publishable data," he growled. His 3 colleagues could see just how close the Russian's anger was to completely boiling over, and knew not to enrage him further. "It's like a sniper. After he takes his shot, he moves on, so that they're looking for him in the wrong place." Avon held up a hand. "Wait, are you saying we need to abandon our lab?" "No," Grigori said. "I don't think so. Not yet." "Good. Bubbles is just getting used to the place," Devlin chirped, but 3 pairs of pissed-off eyes shut him down. "What we need to do," Grigori told them, "is analyze our method, step by step." "I've made a start on that," Fiona said. "Franz," she said, and waited for the machine to recognize the word from the midst of their conversation. "Bring up lessons learned/relearned from earlier today." On screen, Franz told her. He was becoming more efficient by the day. "Okay," Fiona said. "I think it boils down to poor management of our source. We didn't have enough A's and A's on Stillman to know when they moved to patch the overrun. True, Grigori said. The others were nodding too. So, what next time we do a hack, we have to implant a camera in the security room ceiling? Avon asked skeptically. Are we doing that kind of thing now? Webcams, Devlin tried. They're hackable from right here, he said, pointing to his desk. Maybe not. Who says they're pointing in the right direction? Oh, that would be able to get sound. I mean, Grigori asked. Can you lip read, Devlin? No, he admitted. It was probably the most mature thing he'd said all day. So, if we can't know the security updates they're planning, our attacks can never be truly zero-day, Fiona concluded. There's always the chance that they're addressing the vulnerability even as we're trying to exploit it. Grigori brought up the worst-case scenario. And they trace our worm back to us, then we'll go to federal prison until they feel like letting us out. Nobody had ever traced a hack back to us, Avon objected. Not once. First time for everything. Even for being hanged with cheese wire, Grigori noted glumly. Then Devlin said something which stopped the conversation for a long moment. What if the worm could adapt? Switch to a secondary target if it found that the primary vulnerability was plugged, or even, he said, twirling a pen hyperactively, sit quietly in the boot sector or some quiet segment of the memory, waiting and searching for other vulnerabilities. Eyes locked on squares of carpet. Fiona began scribbling on a legal pad. It was Avon who spoke. They'd scan for a signature. They'd see it, sitting there, and zap it. Polymorphic code, Devlin proposed. The security module of the worm constantly rewrites itself so there's no definable signature to be discovered. And it's not copying itself into other files, leaving traces behind. It's just scanning, reading, checking things out. Grigori was nodding and shaking his head as possibilities arose and were discarded, were reconsidered, mutated, and finally began to solidify. It would have to be a very large, very capable virus, he told them, and it would grow as it learned. How would we hide it? The discussion continued into the late afternoon and then well into the evening. Sodas were popped until they made everyone too jittery, and Avon smoked his way through most of his pack of lights. By 8 p.m., with the team starving, Grigori ordered Indian curries and breads, but the meal hardly slowed the flow of innovation. Before any of them realized, it was already 2 hours into Sunday morning. Fiona had filled half a legal pad, ready for dictation to Franz, and Devlin was sketching code notes for a polymorphic security module based on the very worm the bank's machines had just spat out. For what felt like the 18th time, Avon asked his perennial question. For what purpose? They agreed on the need for a coherent hacking strategy, a credo by which they would operate, but the complexities were rich and numerous. We do not steal, Grigori replied to Devlin's latest plea for at least a little bit of high-tech theft. You want to eat cheap curries for the rest of your life? Devlin asked the group. You want to end up on cheese wire? Grigori shot back. We're not thieves, kid. We're hacktivists. You do know the definition, right? Devlin kept his temper in check, knowing full well from experience that the alternative would see him banished from a discussion he himself had instigated and to which he was central. Political activism through computer crime. Am I right? Got it on one, Fiona applauded. And where in that definition does larceny come in? Devlin made to argue the point, but Avon cut him off. If we start stealing, I'm out. No ifs, ands, or buts. There's a big but, Avon, Devlin countered. And you know perfectly well there is. What I do on my own time, Avon said, standing now for the first time in hours, and on my own servers, is my business, not yours. It has nothing to do with this team. Devlin stood too. Fiona was immediately on her way to ensure against an unhelpful outburst of manliness. I'm impressed by your moral flexibility, Avon. I really am, Devlin was saying. Steal using your own machines, but not by using ours. Rob under one auspice, but not under another. Is the rest of your personal life so flexible,
Huh? Is it boys one week and girls the next?
Right before Avon could slap him across the chops, Fiona pulled Devlin back into his seat.
You're going to apologize,
Grigori said, having not moved from his own seat.
Now.
Fiona stayed in place between them, her role as maid and mother extending now to something like a bouncer. She hated it, but this was their warped and predictable pattern. Devlin hated hypocrisy but had appalling social skills. Avon faced crippling debt. Grigori just wanted his team to cohere and do good work, and she felt responsible for each one of them in different ways. It drove her crazy. They drove her crazy. The youngster mumbled something about having spoken out of turn, and the emotional heat gradually ebbed from the room. Grigori got them back on track.
Devlin, you're telling me the worm we just wrote, the one that crashed and burned at MSB, it's a good platform, a starting point for something much larger, much more capable?
It was as though the argument with Avon had never happened.
Much, much more capable, man. I mean, we can instruct it to interrogate the system's architecture and spot weaknesses. We can ask it to search for specific information and then securely transmit the data over their own connections. All we'd need is a few throwaway email addresses. We could teach it and it would learn. I'm serious, folks, he said, genuinely excited now. This could be a breakthrough, a learning virus.
They talked it through until the sun came up. Fiona begged for a break, and Grigori sent them home until Monday morning. He even agreed to tidy up the lab before leaving.
First time for everything,
Avon quipped.
I kind of hate how it's always your job.
Fiona patted his shoulder. You do your shit too, but that's all any of us should have to do. It's like having college student housemates or something, she chuckled.
Yeah, only one's ex-Russian mafia, and another is a goddamn genius.
And the third is falling more deeply in love with me by the day. Yeah, I really can pick the finest places to work, can't I? Avon laughed.
Can I drop you at home?
He had asked perhaps a half-dozen times, but Fiona knew not to lead him on. She hadn't even told him where she lived, for his own well-being, as much as anything. She didn't want to reveal too much about herself. No, thanks though, Should she lie or tell the truth? I'm meeting a recently divorced high school friend at his place. We'll probably watch a couple of dirty movies and then try every position we can think of until we're too exhausted to move. I've got some errands to run on the way home. You have a good Sunday. Get some rest. They hugged very briefly, as they often did. She was always careful not to press too close or give anything approaching the wrong impression. Fiona turned and left, waving goodbye to Devlin as he came down the fire escape and into the little parking lot behind the building.
Hey, I want to say,
he began.
Yeah?
Avon knew what was coming and decided he'd rather spare Devlin the cringingly awkward 10 seconds of apology.
Are we learning yet?
Slowly, Devlin admitted.
I just see red, man. It becomes impossible not to say it, once it's popped into my head.
Look, Avon said, unlocking his black VW.
I'm a son of a bitch, I know. I'm a hypocrite and a liar, but I need to get that fucking monkey off my back, man. You know?
His hand formed a fist on the car's roof. Devlin wondered if his anger might boil up again. The last time, he'd gotten them thrown out of a bar, all because of how frustrated he felt at owing the federal government 3 years of private university tuition and rent, and good time money. The debt stacked up so high, he couldn't see over the top.
I know,
Devlin said.
Look, if you ever needed a loan, just for a few months or whatever.
Avon slid into the driver's seat.
No, not yet. But I won't let you forget if one day I'm really stuck.
He nodded. The two were, arguments and fractious childish comments aside, friends of 3 years' standing. Devlin hated the thought of hurting his feelings. Avon just wished the precocious little dick would think a bit more before speaking.
Drive safe.
Avon joined the Sunday traffic, aware that he had plenty of time to have breakfast and peruse the day's race schedule before the track opened at 11. As he headed south on the Cross Island Parkway, putting miles between himself and the group, their opinions of him, her rejection of him, he found a peace and privacy which he truly cherished. Just as when he was carrying out those nerve-wracking hacks against banks and insurance companies, diverting their funds and confusing their security people, this was his own time, and no one else had any claim upon it. As ever, it was good to be with Fiona, and it was good to get away. Out of sight and mostly out of mind, she would not exert her well-meaning but firm grip on his emotions for another 22 hours. She could have no idea, he knew, but working in that little apartment was killing him, one day after another, just because she was so unavailable to him. But he was insulated from it now, safe. Smiling as the feeling pervaded him, he lit a cigarette and opened the window to let its fumes merge with those of the highway, the borough, this unique, sprawling city. In a few moments he'd be among a couple of friends, both elderly men, of course, comparing recent form and speculating as to the going of the turf. He'd employ his skills in yet another way, judging probabilities and calculating risks. And there would be 3 or 4 or maybe a half-dozen races, each one marked by the rising of anticipation, the wondering and guessing and hoping and cheering. When it didn't work out, there was no real slump now, not anymore, just a shrug and a resolution to move on to the next one. Can't win 'em all, son. But when his horse came home, it was something greater than just a win, more than a big handful of extra dollars. It was a welcome reminder that the universe, at least on some days, would proceed exactly as he directed. For those few moments of orgasmic, body-tingling power, he would be the master of creation. It was the greatest imaginable feeling, and one which he absolutely had to have.